would like to put forward a motion to be debated at a future meeting. And the motion reads as follows, that whereas...
Mr. Cooper, okay, let's hear your motion first, and then I'll release the minister. Go ahead.
Okay. Whereas the Minister of Finance has accepted...
Minister first claimed, but with the We Foundation, whose sole purpose is real estate holdings.
Well, today in Canadian politics, we have the government is going to show up again, and then there's three committees, the Finance, the Ethics, and Seth. And a couple of them are later, and the Finance should be exciting yet again, or informative, I should say. Next up, okay, so the committees. Now, this is odd. Rachel Harder is the Seth Committee Chair, and she's also the Ethics Committee Chair. And in my opinion, didn't do a great job last time. Hopefully she does. Now, there's the Finance Committee and its members, and that's just been basically, only can say, hard-hitting. So...
I've never heard of anything that's how we do business in this country. So, Mr. Brown, I want to ask you a bit about the real estate holdings of We Corporation, We Charity. You know, my daughters were involved with Free the Children when they were young. It seemed like a really great grassroots organization. I can't keep track of the multiple corporate entities that have grown up around the Kielburgers, some transparent, some very murky. Can you sort of place their real estate holdings in context of where they are as an organization?
Mr. Angus, I'm going to try to limit myself to what we've reported already. As you have pointed out, the many different entities which hold real estate, both for We's private companies, for their various charities, holding companies, the Kielburger family themselves, relatives of the Kielburger family, is incredibly complicated. Some colleagues of Canada Land at other news organizations have been doing a terrific job of beginning the work of untangling all of that, and Canada Land will have some information on that soon, but I hope you'll respect the practice of journalism as such that before we have things completely nailed down, I hesitate to comment here what I wouldn't report through our news organization.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm going to refer to one of your articles where your interview with Charity Intelligence, where they said the fact that the We Group were holding so much real estate debt that was in the terms of short-term on-demand loans was a huge, huge red flag. So my question would be, one, is that unusual for a charity? And do you think that put a lot of financial pressure on the Kielburgers in terms of these short-term real estate debts that they were holding?
Yeah, so I can speak to that because having interviewed Kate Bain of Charity Intelligence, she told Canada Land that she'd never seen anything like this, that she likened the way that We was leveraging itself, the We Charity was leveraging itself to somebody with a credit card with a $10,000 limit who was constantly at $9,500. This was short-term, on-demand loans, revolving debt. And given that the We organization the We Charity was investing so heavily, so rapidly in Toronto real estate, it to her eye as an independent auditor, I believe the phrase was massive red flags were raised as a result of what she saw in their audited financials. And in the audited financials, something popped out at me. The auditor brought up the responsibility of management for assessing the organization's ability to continue as a going concern in light of the breach of these bank covenants 2 years running. And the auditor, the auditor that We Charity chose to audit their financials said that unless management either intends to liquidate the organization or to cease operations or has no realistic alternative but to do so, they must maintain this responsibility to keep this going. This is something this is a very sober warning that was not routine. There was nothing like it in their previous financial statements. And one thing that we did point out in our reporting is that when We Charity was in this seemingly very precarious financial situation, that's when the amount of money flowing out of the charity into Mark and Craig Kilberger's private company increased sharply the last 2 years, up to I think 8% and then 7% in the last two years. Prior to that, We Charity was moving money to this private company, but at a rate of about 2% of the revenues. When you consider that this is in the neighborhood of a $60 million charity, 7-8% of charitable revenues is a significant amount of money.
Okay, that's very interesting. So we know that they were having to pull money out of the charity into their private corporation. We know that there was defaults on the bank covenants. These red flags are being raised, and then COVID hits, and their business model, which is mass rallies backed by corporate sponsors, is wiped out. I'm wondering if this would have created a financial crisis that precipitated their attempt to go to the government to get a program. So that's the first question. But then the fact that the government agrees to funnel the money through the real estate holding company, would that have been done to stabilize the debts so that they didn't have to liquidate their real estate assets?
To your first question, I think that's a terrific line of inquiry that we are pursuing as well. It's not something I'd speculate on. To your second, I know what you know from the terrific Global News report today, which is that by WE's own description, they set up this other entity, this new entity, for exactly that reason, to limit their liability. I would just add to committee that WE has brought up the impact of the pandemic on their charitable operations. I do not doubt that it was significant. Canada Land has not been able to independently verify that the financial trouble at WE is solely based on the pandemic, and the breach of the bank covenants precede the pandemic.
Finance Minister's office to put this money through a real estate holding company, I find very, very troubling. Mr. Brown, I'd like to go back to you about the concerns that were raised by Charity Intelligence. I saw that we had written a very aggressive rebuttal to Charity Intelligence, but they did not talk about Charity Intelligence's comments on the real estate deals. The fact that there were short-term on-demand loans with the banks that were causing a number of red flags. I'm not any kind of forensic auditor, but a lawyer suggested to me that if you sign a deal through the real estate holding company, it would certainly stabilize the Kielburgers' real estate holdings with the bank, because they could say, look at the agreement we have. Would you suggest that this massive influx of money from the federal government would help the Kielburger operation maintain their real estate assets at this time of financial crisis?
Mr. Angus, again, we're well outside of what our reporting has covered. I know that the WE organization themselves have said that they established this new entity in order to limit their liability, and I can't imagine that they would do anything that if it was not in their interests. I think if I can suggest something to committee, it is that these are very, very complicated dealings, and given the amount of public money involved, given the amount of charitable money raised by Canadians involved, Canada Land was happy to dedicate resources to breaking this story. Other journalists and organizations like Kate Baines, when we look into these things and try to make sense of them, which we're doing with everything we have, we are assuming the liability with an organization that aggressively protects its reputation, makes legal threats, and has a history of saying things to the media that are simply not true. I wonder at what point there are other authorities that might ask these questions, that might have powers to procure information that, as an independent journalist, I do not have.
Thank you for that. Mr. Singh, you say that you have a number of students ready to go. You've been waiting 6 weeks for a response. What I find concerning in terms of just besides the financial deals with we organization, but that we had 2 months from April till the end of June when this program was announced to get this set up. And we've been told by the government again and again, they were the only people who could do it. They had all the skills, they were set to go. And yet when the deal was announced, they couldn't, between the government and they couldn't seem to take even the smallest amount of scrutiny before everybody panicked and bolted. And there was no program in place. In that 2 months, it should have been easy for the government to step in because we have tens of thousands of students across the country waiting for work. We have organizations ready to work. Why do you think an organization like yours is still sitting waiting for students when we're now coming to the almost, the 3/4 mark of July and halfway through the summer?
Thanks for the question. I mean, I'm going to try and bide my tongue here. I think feel free to speak, my friend. Feel free to speak. I think there's some inefficiency in process. And when I was talking about programming too much big money through big partners and offloading liability from government by saying, listen, simply we program the money in April because like people like yourself can come back and say, how come that money is still not out? How come it's not to charities, which is the case in that $350 million grant? One of them is woefully undersubscribed. One of the partners have come back to us and even said, we've gotten approval on the Red Cross grant. However, they're telling us, we haven't gotten the money yet as of last week, but they're telling us to reapply. So if a fund is woefully unsubscribed, it tells you that there's a problem in program design. So I think the program design of that was inefficient and improper, and hopefully will be changed for the next rollout. The program design of this bursary program is poorly designed. You have the issue of this $10 an hour bursary thing that concerned us, and we raised our concerns on it. And when we wrote to government, we said, listen, why don't you try starting pilots with us, right? Like we can put a few hundred kids across the GTA, get them doing the things that you want, which is, packing these food aid kits and getting them out to communities that need them and really providing good value for money. Because respectfully, Charlie, I can make a bag of Saskatchewan grown green peas for 48 cents. You can't buy that in Walmart for less than $2, which means every dollar that comes in through us is literally 4 times the amount in aid going out. Like that's really good value for money. So if we started small, and we put these students in, which is the offering that we gave them initially, and certainly the offering that we went with we would at least have these students benefiting and helping us to help other folks. And it frustrates me to no end because I've got some young people that we've recruited who ask us every day, are we going to get the bursary? And I don't know. I hope the government will honor its commitment. Sorry, Chair, I'll just finish up quickly. Yeah. But I'm so hopeful that you as a committee will help us get this thing kick-started because I don't want the kids to be the losers. And I'm very hopeful that as a government, we're going to work together to do better and more efficient programming so we don't waste taxpayer dollar and we get more aid to people that need it.
Well, thank you for that.
Sorry, Charlie, we're out of time. We'll have to go tight in 5 minutes for the next 3, Mr. Cumming, Mr. Biddle, and Ms. Gray. Mr. Cumming.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Brown, in your research that you're doing for your reporting, were you able to find out, the Kielburgers are obviously very involved with all their the raft of companies that they have. In fact, they've submitted at least 2 proposals to the government on programs that they thought that the government should be involved with. But I find it curious that the Kielburgs are listed as founders and not as...
I elaborated on the timeline in my prepared remarks.
So
I was not involved directly in any of those proposals being received or any of those direct discussions with other organizations. I do know that process went through the public service.
Sorry, could you give us the names of any other organizations? Because the question we're dealing with was whether a group that's very close to you and your family and very close to the Prime Minister's family was given the inside track. So we know that you talked with Craig Kielburg. Now you say you didn't discuss this, but the die had been set. We know that your finance officials had reached out to Rachel Wernick to tell her to talk to we. We know that there had been at least 2 weeks of discussing between the first proposal and the second proposal. So were there other groups that were invited at that time to bring forward proposals. Will you give us the names of any that may have been involved?
Mr. Minister, go ahead.
I am aware that there were consultations with a number of groups that provide service for youth. I'm not aware of each one of those names. That was never presented to me. I'm certain, Mr. Chair, that we can provide an awareness of the organizations that were consulted with during the course of this period.
Okay, thank you. Because Minister Chagger said that the idea came from Rachel Wernick, the civil servant. Rachel Wernick told us that she learned about this when everyone else learned about it, and she was directly contacted by your staff. My concern here, Mr. Morneau, is if you were being the pack mule for the Kielburgers to get this proposal through, the fact that you refuse to recuse yourself is very, very damning. It really raises questions here. Why did you refuse to recuse yourself?
Mr. Minister.
Well, thank you. To be clear, we were in a position where we were trying to determine ways that we could deliver on behalf of students. That was the goal here. The idea was to find
financial connection.
Charlie, the minister has relatively equal time here. Allow him to answer first. Go ahead, Mr. Minister.
That was our overriding goal. We knew that it was important to figure out a way to engage with students to help them to get back to school. That was my overriding concern. Given the legitimate perception of a conflict around my involvement previously, I have said that in hindsight I should have recused myself, and that was a mistake on my part.
Mr. Angus.
Have you read the Conflict of Interest Act?
Mr. Minister?
Mr. Chair, I believe when I first came into office, I would have had access to all of those acts.
So you're not familiar with it. The fact that you just remembered that we paid $41,000 for you to do travel. Are you not aware that under the Conflict of Interest Act, Sections 11, Section 12, Section 15 of the Code are explicit? And it's also explicit about the ministers are not to be getting paid travel. So if you don't really remember the Conflict of Interest Act, you remember the Aga Khan ruling by the Ethics Commissioner, because it seems that he made direct rulings about a situation that you are now in. Isn't there someone in your office who would tell you, come on, Minister, these are the rules. This is the law of the land. It applies to you as well.
Go ahead, Mr. Minister.
Mr. Chair, it is a mistake on my part not to have paid expenses. As I've said, I did not know that those expenses were not paid. I did not have any awareness of that. But over the course of the last short while, I've reviewed my records in detail, and given that serious oversight, I have made sure that has been rectified. But I recognize that it was a mistake, and I take responsibility for that.
Charlie, before you start again, can you hold your microphone a little closer and don't be rubbing it? The translators are having difficulty. Go ahead.
Sorry,
I'll give you the time back.
Me here. Thank you. Well, I guess the issue here is that we paid for your travel. That has the apparent perception of attempting to buy political influence. The fact that you're talking with Craig Kielburger, you're talking with I'm not sure they're registered to lobby. They're hiring your daughter. You're not thinking that there's a problem here, but they're paying for influence. I think that that's really, really concerning that you didn't seem to think that that was a problem. So I'd like to end on the question with you signed a contribution agreement with a real estate holding company. How in God's name is that a credible decision by the government of Canada to funnel nearly $1 billion to a group that's very close to you and your family, that's very close to the Prime Minister and his family, a group that had gone through there was no public tender here, and they come up with a real estate holding company and you file the money through them? What were you thinking?
Mr. Minister, final answer this round.
Thank you. Well, to start with, as I've said, I I certainly was in error, not paying expenses. I didn't know about those expenses being paid in my behalf, but that was an error, and I have owned up for that error. I know that the government decision around the administration of this program was taken after the appropriate due diligence by the public service. I don't know of which organization in the WE decision was the organization that was given to that contract. That's not something that was brought to my attention. Of course, we expect
a real estate holding company, and you didn't double check that. Where is the due diligence, Minister?
As I've said, Mr. Chair, the public service took a look at how we could best deliver this program and how it could be best administered, and that recommendation was the one that we looked at in order to deliver on behalf of students.
Okay, we'll end that round there, but look, from my perspective, there is some confusion during this round. You've been asked why, as a minister, you didn't call for tenders. I know this was a contribution agreement. The implication is that you were the minister responsible. So I got to ask you two questions. Who was the minister?
Who in the Prime Minister's office had the proposal, and had the Prime Minister seen it?
Well, thank you. I think what's important to know here is that what you're talking about is a proposal for a different program that apparently went to a number of ministers' offices. It came to me directly. I didn't review it at the time. I don't have any way of knowing, but I would be very surprised that would ever go to the Prime Minister. That would not normally be something that he would see.
But the Prime Minister and you were talking about a program that, I know that there was the original proposal, but the second proposal is very, very tied to WE. And they call you up, Mr. Morneau. They reach out to you. It's not your file, it's Ms. Shagger's, but you are a friend of them. They've paid $41,000 to you and your family to travel, and it's not reported. They've hired your daughter. They've paid the Trudeau family over $300,000 at a time. So they have enormous amount of influence. And so this is the question I know you read the Conflict of Interest Act when you first became minister, and it's somewhere back in one of your files, but you need to understand it's about buying political influence, is about being your friend, that they contact your office, that it's your officials that are dealing with them. And so you're dealing with the Prime Minister, and he's got the same idea that you have. And boy, that idea is just like WE. Doesn't it occur to you, Mr. Morneau, that you've been very influenced by this group and they've had the inside track from the get-go, and your relationship with them is helping push that you were the Kielburgers' pack mule pushing this through, and now it's all blown up on you?
We'll have to go to the minister, and please clarify, Minister, whether they called you or you called them, because earlier you said you called Mr. Kielburger over programming, I believe, or curb or whatever it was. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, so to be really clear here, the goal, and certainly in the discussions I had with the Prime Minister, we were thinking about how we could support students. So that was critically important. We needed to come up with ways to make sure that we delivered support to students. The inference that we had any idea of exactly how that support would happen or even how it would be delivered is incorrect. We were thinking about how we would support students, and as we developed the policy, then we passed it to the public service to think about how that could be properly delivered, and that was a critically important step in thinking about how we could get that support. The proposal that was circulated from the WE organization was separate earlier on. I certainly didn't have any awareness of that proposal when it came in. And much later, as I reported, I did have a call with Craig Kielburger, and that was just to understand generally how the COVID-19 situation was impacting businesses and organizations across the country. So, our goal here is and remains to support students. We know that there was a mistake made in terms of how we came through this decision-making process. I should have recused myself. The Prime Minister's also said that, and we will continue to think about how we can best be supportive. And I want to just say that we need to move forward. It is a time of pandemic, and there will be more work for us to do.
Okay, Minister, thank you very much for your testimony.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
What's your point of order, Mr. Cooper?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
On April the 24th, and this is a discussion that we had.
But there was a proposal back around April 7th, April 9th that was circulating, and it was a different proposal. And then we changed our proposal to meet the guidelines. So who in your department spoke with, someone was speaking with we. They weren't coming up with this from the Ouija board. So who was the person at we that was the point person?
Pardon me, I understand your question now. So I can tell you that on April 20th, my minister's office, Amit Singh, had connected with somebody at WE, I'm not sure who, and they were talking about volunteer opportunities, and that is the part that I read in my opening statement, but the enhancing from 8,000 to double.
Charlie, move the microphone a little closer to your mouth too, please.
Okay, I will there, boss. I guess what I'm finding really surprising here is we have a proposal, and it's not the real, the one that the government needs, but then another proposal gets written that's much more close. There had to be negotiations back and forth with we in order to make this thing credible, or was this just done on the back of a napkin? Was there work done so that this proposal, the second proposal, met the requirements so that you could then go and say, this is as close as we can get. This is a group that can do it. So who was that point person?
So I can't speculate, and I don't know who would have been talking to we, if anybody. It certainly was not. It was certainly not me or the Department of Finance officials. Okay. I would clarify for the committee that this second proposal, which was building on the first one, which in addition to social entrepreneurship and business service placements, there was a service placement stream. So COVID, the arts. That is still not the ultimate proposal and what the government agreed to do for a third-party administrator.
So how many other proposals were brought forward by charities in between the first proposal by we and the second? How many other proposals came across the desk at finance from other groups?
So the proposals that came to me, none of these actually came to me. I am aware that there was a proposal from U15 with respect to universities. You'll recall this is an entire student package, not just the student grant.
No, but for this specific plan, it seems odd that there's an original proposal. It's not the same thing at all, but then it begins a series of discussions, and then a second proposal comes forward, and that's very close, and then we becomes the only group. I mean, you guys don't do things on the fly. We're talking about $900 million. There had to be either a number of other proposals you looked at. There had to be serious negotiations you were involved in. Were there other proposals on the table besides we for this specific kind of program? Did you check other groups to say, what could you deliver and how fast could you turn it around?
So what I could say, sir, is that the PM's announcement on April 22nd was high level. There was no identification of a party. It was just a set aside. And ESDC then did follow up with respect to how to deliver this and with whom. So it would be ESDC who would make the determination if
I guess the issue, and I got to end it here, but it's that this program seems tailor-made for we. We's been involved in discussions. Politically exempt staff are involved. You haven't named who they are. The question we're asking, and we're not blaming you, but we're talking about your higher-ups, was we given the inside track? And we haven't seen anything that tells us that between the first and the second proposal, that there was a whole bunch of other proposals on the table. What we've seen is between the first and second proposals that we was certainly able to really refine their position so that when Rachel Wernick called them, they had all the right answers. So I need to know who at we was involved in the discussions and how much discussions went back and forth so that that second proposal was a lot closer to what you guys agreed to. And that's the answer I'm not hearing.
Go ahead, ma'am. Only tell. Oh, thank you. I can only tell you the facts as I understand them and know them. And that is that on April 20th, there was one conversation between my minister's office and we, which I have already discussed. And outside of that, other than my own conversation with Rachel and we on the 24th, I am unaware of any other contact at all, and I can't speak to that.
Okay, thank you. We will go to the last round, 4 minutes apiece. The lineup will be Mr. Cooper, Mr. Fragiskatis, Mr. Morantz, and Ms. Kotrakis. Mr. Cooper.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the witness. I want to just get a better understanding of how we came up.
Minister first claimed, but with the We Foundation, whose sole purpose is real estate holdings. Do you not find this to be spectacularly bizarre?
My opinion of how strange that is not something that I want to offer for the purpose of this committee. I hope you'll appreciate. I prefer to kind of keep my punditry elsewhere and limit myself to my reporting. I think people can come to their own conclusions about whether that is in fact really bizarre.
All right. Well, I've come to mine. So my next question is whether or not you have any speculation as to why the government would direct this kind of a contract to a real estate foundation instead of to the charity itself, and why the Kielburgers would prefer that arrangement.
Again, I'm going to refrain from speculating, Mr. Polyev. I will note that keeping track of the labyrinthine structure of this organization makes reporting incredibly challenging, not merely because we take accuracy so seriously, but because the We organization has responded aggressively when any critics or journalists have, I think in good faith, confused or conflated me to we charity, free the children, entities by the same name in different countries that are very different in their makeup. I can understand that referring to a charity as a private company could have an impact on that charity, but the stated internal mission of We to create one brand that encompasses everything, I think, absolutely leads to confusion, not only amongst children who the organization engages with as both fundraisers and customers, but to journalists who are attempting to scrutinize and hold accountable this organization.
How many different entities are part of the Kielburger empire?
We are aware of 12 in North America. Some of this is completely, doing NGO work and international development. You must set up separate entities in these countries. So some of this is really understandable, but in Kenya, I believe there's 4 different companies. There's the same issues of assets moving from charities to for-profit companies is something that Canada Land is looking very closely at throughout this kind of global empire of entities.
Do you have any comments or observation on the rapid change of hands of numerous expensive properties in Toronto among the Kielburgers and other members of the We network?
I won't speculate. My only comment is that when Canada Land inquired about the real estate holdings, the extensive real estate holdings of the Kielburger family, we were told by attorneys both representing Fred and Teresa Kielburger and by the We organization that these are completely separate affairs and to conflate the two would be a terrible defamation. The We organization has now themselves brought up the Kielburger parents' holdings in their real estate philosophy statement on their website. And the more we learn about the private holdings of the family, the more we discover that they are very much intertwined with the extensive real estate holdings of the charity and of the private for-profit companies of We itself.
Last question, Pierre.
Thank you very much. The We charity originally denied having made any payments to the Trudeau family for speaking fees. So far, we have now, as a result of your reporting, we know that those speaking fees occurred. But what we don't know is how much in expenses, purported or otherwise, the We charity paid for members of the Trudeau family. So I'm not now talking about fees, but expenses to transport Trudeaus from place to place or to cover their accommodation while they are in attendance. Do you have any knowledge of how much that number would be?
No, I know that We Charity has confirmed that they paid for Sophie Gregoire Trudeau's expenses during a trip to the UK. I am aware that media questions have been submitted to the We organization about the exact number. I do not believe that those figures have been disclosed.
Okay, thank you both. Turning to Ms. Zerowitz, followed by Mr. Morantz. Marty, you're up next. Okay, Julie.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all four panelists for presenting today. Very grateful. My first question, and it's a quick one to Ms. Senior. Ms. Senior, thank you so much for the amazing work of the Canadian Women's Foundation. I know that you're a champion for many of my smaller organizations in my riding. Because they're so tiny, they tend to work with larger organizations like yourself.
Brad just got us comment.
We will let her in following the response to where he directed the question. I usually do that. Go ahead.
Thank you for the question. So as I said earlier, we've been provided with two separate agreements with the government in response to COVID. One was the first that was done in April, which was $3 million. And with the exception of Quebec, that was dealt with separately, we were able to distribute funds to sexual assault centers across the country, which was about $3.
That you repaid over $40,000 of expenses associated with your travel on a We charity trip, that you just repaid it today on the same day you were expected to testify under oath about it. Is that just a coincidence, Minister?
Mr. Minister.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I think what I want to make sure that I communicate is this was a mistake on my behalf. I'm responsible for any expenses that I incur on trips being paid for. This was an expense that I was unaware of, that I did not know had not been paid. And when I found that out over the course of the last
$41,000 expense, you didn't know about a $41,000 expense? How is that even possible?
Mr. Minister.
Again, Mr. Chair, I just have to say that in review of our records, I understood that there was no charge for these travel expense or these expenses at the We facilities. And once I found that out, I endeavored to repay that. And of course, it was a mistake on my part, which I take full responsibility for.
I mean, the average Canadian living in Red Deer or Halifax that goes on a trip would notice if there was a, say, a $400 expense that they didn't pay, maybe a hotel room for a couple of nights that never got charged them, and they paid immediately. But you're telling me that on this obviously very luxurious trip, that $41,000 of expenses happened right under your nose, and you didn't know about it until it suddenly, through an epiphany, came to your attention the very day you were to testify in a parliamentary committee about it. You expect us to believe that?
Mr. Chair, is for me.
There's no one else to answer for you, Mr. Morneau. You're the one.
Sorry, I was muted, Mr. Minister. Yes, you got the floor.
As I said, this was a mistake on my behalf. We immediately looked at our records. We reviewed those records to find the flights and the hotel expenses that were paid, and did not find any expenses that were charged to us for the time at the WE facilities. When we went through our records in detail and concluded that, we realized, my wife and I, that we needed to have someone reach out to the WE organization, and did that in order to pay those expenses. It is my mistake. It is a mistake that I regret. I apologize for that. And as I said, I will definitely work with the Ethics Commissioner, including this issue, to make sure it's fully understood and accounted for.
Back to Mr. Poilievre.
Do you realize that originally accepting these free benefits associated with your trip was strictly illegal under the Conflict of Interest Act? Yes or no?
Mr. Minister.
Mr. Chair, we of course recognize that we are responsible for our own expenses. That is my responsibility. It was something I was unaware of, and so that
do you realize it was
being
illegal?
Unaware,
do you realize now that it was illegal?
Mr. Minister.
That those expenses, which I was unaware of, were appropriately my expenses, and that's why we've repaid them.
You realize, though, that it was illegal. You are, as a minister, strictly forbidden from accepting any form of sponsored travel under the Conflict of Interest Act. I'm asking you, do you realize that the Act makes it illegal for you to have accepted these expenses paid for by we in the first place? Do you realize that that was illegal? Yes or no?
Mr. Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, as I've said, I looked back in a detailed fashion over my records. I found that that we received no expenses notice for these expenses. As soon as we found that out, we endeavored to make sure those payments were made, and it's a mistake. I will, and
all right. Thank you very much.
Work with the Ethics Commissioner.
Did you in the month of August 2019 announce a grant for We Charity for $3 million in the same month that your daughter accepted a job from that organization? Yes or no?
Mr. Minister.
Mr. Chair, I think it's important to know that program, which I did announce, was developed and delivered by Employment and Social Development Canada. As the person who was responsible for that organization in the riding, I did announce that program.
So you announced a $3 million grant to an organization that had just hired your daughter the very same month. True statement or false statement?
My microphone is on.
Go ahead, Mr. Minister. Thank you. I want to be very clear that this is a program that was developed,
true or false?
Delivered by the Employment and Social Development Canada. I announced it on behalf of our government, but was not involved in the development of that program.
But your daughter accepted a position with that organization.
Pierre, last question.
So in the same month as your daughter accepted a position with the organization, you announced a $3 million grant to that organization. You can just tell me if I'm wrong. Am I wrong?
Mr. Chair, I'm obviously very proud of the fact that Grace took on a co-op job at the WE organization. I'm proud of the fact that she, of her own accord, went out and got a first job in an administrative capacity. And obviously, my role as a minister is separate and distinct from that. I did deliver an announcement, but I was not involved in the development or the understanding of that program.
Okay, thank you both. We'll go to Ms. Koutrakis, followed by Mr. Fortin. Ms. Koutrakis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister Morneau, for appearing before the Finance Committee once again this afternoon. I truly appreciate the candor in your testimony and for all the work that you and your family and our civil servants and the Department of Finance do for all Canadians, especially during this difficult time. I have a few questions, so in the interest of time, I will ask them all and leave it with you, Minister, to formulate your response. How many new programs have you and your department rolled out in the past 100 days or so? What is the approximate value of these programs? Roughly how many Canadians and Canadian businesses and nonprofit organizations have they helped from these programs? Does this compare to anything remotely similar?
April the 18th in the evening. At this point, we are discussing a broad range of issues, including...
Sorry, we don't have a lot of time. I'm just asking if you were the one who first suggested we, that's all.
Yep, I was certainly the one who initiated the meeting. We were talking about grant and credit and whether there was opportunities for...
Did you suggest we? Did you suggest we?
I do not recall if it was me who actually raised the idea, but what I do recall clearly is that we all agreed to it. And just to be clear to the committee, that it was in the context of volunteer placement in mobilizing through their social media to
so
get students in that.
So prior to that, had you discussed the idea of employing we for this with any exempt staff of the government, of any of the ministers?
No. According to my records, the first mention of we to me is on April 16th. And that, again, is in a conversation that I was having with my colleagues at ESDC. And again, this is in the context of...
What were their names? What were their names?
On that call on April 16th, that would be Rachel Warnick and also the Associate Deputy Minister.
Which one? Who is that?
Benoit Robidoux.
And did they suggest where they had heard that idea of bringing in we?
This wasn't about bringing in we. This was about the fact that we could partner with a company like we to do volunteer matching.
Yeah. So the question was, did they mention if they had where they heard that idea from?
Pierre, we'll give the lady time to answer if we could, Ms. Kovacic.
Yes, the idea was a partnership. Could a company like we do volunteer matching?
Point of order.
Go ahead. What's your point of order?
So I'm not interested in what the idea was. I'm asking where it came from. The question was very specific. It was very clear. We don't have a lot of time. I'd ask you to call the witness to answer the question. The question was, did ESDC officials in that meeting mention where they had first heard the idea of bringing we into the delivery of this program or involving it in any way?
I never asked that. Oh,
go ahead, Ms. Kovacic.
All I can say is that ESDC raised the issue. We never discussed where the issue came from, and that was it.
How many times did you discuss we with exempt staff in the government?
With exempt staff in the government, I wouldn't know off the top of my head.
Once.
But leading up to the Prime Minister's announcement, I imagine there would be a number of occasions where I would talk about the partnerships that we could enter into.
And how many? Roughly half a dozen times.
I don't know. I can't recall.
Okay. Do you remember with whom you had you discussed we?
I would have I would very gladly turn over my emails, and I could, we could say very specifically with whom I was discussing. I would like to make clear to the committee that the discussions were on a broad range of ideas and companies.
So did you ever discuss we with Minister Morneau?
Yes, most certainly. Of course,
when?
The government.
On what dates?
Just to give the
no, she did answer the question, to her credit.
Yes,
so on what dates?
Allow her to answer the questions.
Sure.
Ms. Kovovich, go ahead.
Thank you. I can tell you that leading up to the Prime Minister's announcement on the 22nd, there were 3 briefings of Minister Morneau, the 14th, the 18th, and the 21st. At no point in any of these briefings did we talk about the idea or advice was given to select we as a recipient for a third party. So that never came up.
Yeah, that wasn't my question. My question was, when did you
Last question, Pierre.
All right. So the question was, again, on what occasions did you discuss we with Bill Morneau? What occasions? That's all. Just that specific question.
So only when I have a scheduled briefing with the minister, and I gave you the 3 scheduled briefings. The first one on the 14th, we were talking about the broad $9 billion package, and absolutely not about we. But on the 18th and the 21st, there was a range of a grant, a credit. We talked about Shopify, Ceridian. In a verbal briefing, I certainly may have mentioned it. In our actually analysis, we do not talk about it except for what the minister did actually say, and that is we attached the annex of the first proposal that we received from we to a briefing note without any recommendation and without any analysis.
Muted. There you go, Vivian.
The question I asked is whether they share data with corporate partners or political parties or anyone that supports them, and I did not receive a response.
And is there any basis upon which you have to suspect that they may be sharing their data with political parties, such as the Liberal Party of Canada?
Yes.
Okay, could you elaborate upon that?
I have heard that they have done so.
And you've heard this through
people
sources?
Yes, but I have no documentation.
And when have you heard this?
That I heard that this happened as far back as before the 2015 federal election, and that we data was used to select swing ridings, target swing ridings in the 2015 federal election.
And that has, to your knowledge, based upon your sources, continued after the 2015 election?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I know that's when it started, or I've been told that that is when it is believed to have started, and I don't know with what regularity or if at all it has continued. That's why I asked the question.
Right, and again, these are from multiple sources that you heard this from.
Well, that the Liberal Party was involved, no, that's only from one source.
Okay, but it's your understanding that substantial data was transferred.
No, I don't know.
No. Okay, you have some information. Okay, so the bottom line is you have some information, but you don't have any further details.
No. But okay. Except to say this, that it would. I think the question here is that why was the federal government so keen to award this contract despite all the red flags? What was the reason? Was there a benefit? And I think a database like that, if in fact it is good quality data, I don't know how good they are at using Salesforce. I do know that I've seen in their financials that they pay about $140,000 a year for the Salesforce license. So I don't know what the quality of their data is, but it's a very enviable data set if it is as good as it could be.
Now, we know, Ms. Krause and Mr. Brown, that we had been in breach of their banking covenants starting in 2018. How difficult was that to find?
Who are you asking, me?
Either Ms. Krause or Mr. Brown or both.
Not difficult at all. Just read the financial statements. It's the first thing you should read if you're looking at any charity.
Mr. Brown, would you concur? You've reported on it.
Yeah, this information came to our attention via Charity Intelligence, which is an independent charity watchdog. They found that in the last two sets of audited financials from We. I believe that Charity Intelligence did have some resistance getting one set of financial disclosures from We Charity, but ultimately they did come into possession of those documents, and it was clear 2 years running that they were in breach of
and this has been in the public domain for some time.
That's correct.
That's correct. So when we put forward their proposal to the government respecting the Canada Student Service Grant, this information would have been readily available, easily accessible, and widely known. Is that fair?
I think that it was accessible certainly through the Charity Intelligence report on We Charity and possibly other places as well.
So how do you square that with representations from officials of government who say they just had no idea about this from a due diligence standpoint?
I don't attempt to.
Okay, fair enough. Now, in terms of the $64,000 that was paid by We directly, through her agency to Margaret Trudeau, was that money paid back to We?
According to We Charity, this was a billing error. Our documentation shows that it was, if it was a billing error, it was actually a series of many billing errors because payments were in the realm of $7,500 speaking fee split into two payments. So if you think of $64,000 in payments, that suggests many, many errors. And I'll also point out to this committee, as we've reported, up until, I believe, June 26th, We Charity was telling the public that they had made no payments, neither from their for-profit company or from their charity to the Trudeaus at all. So to their later statement that when they realized these billing errors, they reimbursed the money, it logically follows that they realized these errors when Canada Land showed them that we knew about these errors, at which point, I'll give them benefit of the doubt, they reimbursed their charity.
Last question, Michael.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of money going back and forth between We and Me to We and Me to We to We. And it's We's position that in the end, We has come out on top. Could you just discuss or explain donations compared to contributions and how, in fact, we may not have come out on top in the end?
As Canada Land reported, based on our interview with Kate Bain of Charity Intelligence, when Me to We, the company, moves resources to We Charity, it is a mixture of money, time, products, and because Me to We is a privately held company, we don't really have much insight into what that mixture is. However, when We Charity moves charitable funds raised in our schoolrooms and elsewhere to the Kielburgers' private company, that's cash.
Okay, we will now
travel expenses, and that the Minister of Finance is in flagrant breach of multiple sections of the Conflict of Interest Act, including but not limited to sections 6, 11, and 21, in addition to prior violations that the Standing Committee on Finance hereby call on the Minister to immediately resign.
So you were you're given the 48-hour notice. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for that. That notice is given. Mr. Morneau, thank you for your appearing before the committee today and giving your statement and your answering our questions and taking the extra time that normally happens when we have a minister before the committee. So thank you very much with that. So you're released, Minister.
Okay, thank you.
Question about the reasonability of using contribution agreements in a crisis situation.
Mr. Singh?
Yeah, you're not wrong in using the contribution agreements. That's fine, but you have to evaluate the efficacy of the contribution agreements. And frankly, Peter, you've just proven my point. You've given Miss Senior's group $13 million, $3 million, which she's programmed, and she's just told you she's 2/3 of the way through the $10 million. When you calculate the amount of time it's taken, and I'm sure she's done an effective job with it in getting aid to their network, but it proves the point. It's going to their network. It's not going to outside agencies that may be doing really good work, so that there's people on the outside looking in, not getting those funds. The other thing to consider now is she's talking about 13 million. I'm talking about 350 million to 3 parties as opposed to 13 million to 1. Respectfully, if we had gone on an approach to multiple parties to do multiple contribution agreements, perhaps regional, perhaps sectoral, I would say you would have a better value for money. The public service could have done that. If you take the approach of using multiple ways of doing this, so contribution agreements plus innovative funds plus regional response funds, and this is all in the document that I presented to you, you would have a better holistic approach to help Canadians in need. I'm not saying what you've done is horrible, what you've done is good, but it could be better.
Okay, we'll have to end it there. I would like to get to 5 more questions. We'll start with Mr. Fortin, then Mr. Angus, then Mr. Cumming, then Mr. Biddle, and Ms. May. Mr. Fortin, 3 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you, Chair. If I may, what we've just heard, 300 million for 3 parties? Are we talking about
breach of its obligations to its bankers? Before this was all information that was available. I saw the financial statements on their website, 2018 statement. Mm-hmm. It was public information. Anyone in the public service could have seen it. That alone should have preempted the awarding of this contract. Companies under financial duress. There's loans that need to be repaid. Virtually their entire board just resigned. That alone should have preempted the awarding of this agreement. The Prime Minister and Minister of Finance had obvious conflicts of interest. That alone should have preempted the awarding of this agreement. We is not even a registered lobbyist and yet had major access to high-up government officials. Huge red flag. Craig Kielburger is a member of the Leaders Debates Commission at the same time as he's putting out campaign-style ads featuring the Prime Minister. I don't even know how to describe that. It just seems like such a huge conflict. Again, that alone should have preempted the awarding of this contract. The relationship between the government and the Kielburgers was so close, it was bound to raise questions about an almost $1 billion program being turned over to them. Any neutral observer of these facts, and these aren't all of the facts, would have to come to the conclusion that this is just not an honest use of taxpayers' dollars. So I guess what my preamble is quite lengthy, but I wanted to give you a little more time because you said in your opening statement you could use a little more time. Just to, why would the government do this? They must have recognized all of these red flags. What would be any other reason that they would actually plow ahead and do this?
Well, that's the big question here is why? Why all these red flags and why were they all ignored? And that's what got me looking into this. And there's one issue that we haven't talked about yet, and that's the elections activism of we, okay? So in the 2015 election, for example, they authored an op-ed in the Globe and Mail urging youth to get out and vote. And if you watch their videos, you'll see, for example, little button that, I voted today, right? They're inserting the imagery of young people voting as part of being a good person, right? As part of the brand of the We movement. We're people who vote, right? We have the little vote button. Even last fall in the 2019 election, we hosted a federal election debate viewing party. So this organization very clearly is about getting out the youth vote. So the question is, does that factor into any of the reasons why they got this money? I don't have the answer, but my hope in coming to the committee is that what I've shared will, and of course what others have shared too. Jesse brought up many important points. I hope that this will help the committee to identify the right questions. Because if you're asking the wrong question, it doesn't really matter what the answer is. And I think right now there's been too much discussion on the speaking fees of the Trudeau family and the Morneau family, affiliations. I personally, it doesn't make sense to me that would have been the reason for a $1 billion contract. It just doesn't make sense. But what does make sense is that, in fact, we is part of the Liberal Party election machine. That makes a lot more sense. So what I'm suggesting is that the committee, when you have my understanding from Twitter is that the Kielburgers are going to come and testify. So I think they should answer the question, yes or no. Do you provide data or information to any political party?
And you mentioned you had written a letter to them asking that very question. When did you send that letter?
Last week.
Last week. So if the answer was no, it would have been a simple just to reply no.
In fairness to them, I think they've probably been under a lot of pressure lately. And, there's a lot of big brands. I think the most nervous people these days must be the people in the boards of the Royal Bank and TELUS and Nordstrom and Ford Motors and all these big brands that have given we literally, tens of millions of dollars. There's one more point I want to mention that hasn't been raised with regards to their financials. And that's that on the expenditures, more than half of their expenditures, okay, this is, well over $200 million, more than half of their total expenditures are unspecified. That's 52%. And another 11% is the fair market value of donated goods. So right there, that's 2/3 of their expenditures. And because they don't provide consolidated financial statements, there's no way of knowing whether that expenditure is just paying back and forth between the various entities.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry,
I go to. Do I have quick one for Mr. Brown? No.
We're really out of time. We're
right.
over. Sorry about that, Marty.
That's all right.
Thank you. Ms. Krause, on this, I do have to come in here. Corporate donations, whether in money or in services in kind, were abolished in 2003. Have you checked with the Elections Canada? Because if there was donations in kind or in money for a corporation, that is entirely illegal. And I do think we had to be very, very careful at this committee. I know what you say at committee is you're immune from being charged. If you said something in public, you could be challenged by legal counsel. So do you have any evidence that there's been donations to the Liberal Party in kind or in service? You said it was part of the Liberal Party election machine. That's a very, very serious charge.
But let's clarify that there are many ways to be part of the election machine of any political party without making a cash donation. And in fact, the way elections are run these days, it's the in-kind donations that are making the biggest impact. Something as simple as a tweet from Barack Obama in the last election. Okay, so it's not just about cash. I would also like, if I may mention, Mr. Easter, I testified to your committee a year ago, the 6th of May, and in that testimony I mentioned that I was concerned about how the political activity audits of charities had been handled. I mentioned that the CRA had audited 42 charities. 41 out of 42 were not compliant. When Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was elected, he suspended those audits, rewrote the law, and the audits were finalized with the retroactively rewritten law. I think that in light of this We Charity issue, we need to know who were the audited charities. Is we one of them? Is We Charity one of the charities that was under audit?
There is no question. There is no question, Ms. Krause. We need to get to the bottom of this. But some of the speculation injures parties, injures reputations, and I want us to stick at this committee hearing as close to fact. I don't care whether it's the Liberal Party, the NDP, or the Conservative Party, or the Bloc Québécois. Speculation is not what we want to see. We want to get close to the facts. So I'll turn to Mr. Fragiskatis. Mr. Fragiskatis.
May I make one more very important point?
Service could help. They told us that the only way to deliver for students under the necessary policies would be through another organization. Did you try to make a limited call for tenders? Did you even envisage that possibility? A call for tenders light.
Go ahead, Mr. Minister.
Thank you. Well, for me, I was with the others in a situation where I received information and recommendations about how we could deliver the program for students from the public service. But did you examine the possibility of a type of call for tenders light? Did you think about that? I'm sure that it was a question that the public service could consider as to how we should do things. But why didn't you do it? Well, then why didn't you do that? It was their decision to make a recommendation, but you're the minister. It was the approach that they recommended to deliver the program. With all the respect I have for you, Mr. Minister, but you yourself say that the public service recommended something, but you're the decision maker here. You're the minister. It's not your wife, it's not your spouse, it's not your secretary, you're the minister. You know that it's possible to have a type of short-term call for tenders that would allow for this. So why didn't you do it? Why didn't you ask for someone to do this? Well, the departments considered the policy, and that was very important. And after the departments considered how it should be delivered, it was an important consideration. But the people who work for the public service work hard. They work. Yes, I understand, Minister. The Minister of Finance did not insist that they move to a call for tenders. I have other questions. We have to move on, Minister. I think that with respect to We Charity, we learned that We Charity was involved with the public service, that they were interacting with the public service. Did you, as minister, do your due diligence to see whether or not this interaction between the two entities was such that you could move on your program of a number of millions of dollars? It was up to the public service to see how the program should be delivered. And did you read the auditor's report? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear. Were you aware of the due diligence report before making your cabinet decision? I saw a recommendation. I got a recommendation from the public service. For the past 5 years, I know that they have been working with a great deal of intelligence, and they are very capable in the public service. They make recommendations to deliver our policies on an emergency basis. So you're saying you didn't have any awareness? No. One last question, Mr. Chair. One last question, please.
Je comprends, monsieur.
I understand, Mr. Minister, that you never made yourself aware of a report on due diligence, the audit. Am I right in saying that? I received recommendations from the public service. I looked at many other things, the importance of support for our students, and that was part of the deliberation.
Okay. Thank you both, Mr. Angus for 6 minutes, and then followed by Mr. Cooper for 5. You're muted. There you go, Vivian.
The question I asked is whether they share data with corporate partners or political parties or anyone that supports them, and I did not receive a response.
And is there any basis upon which you have to suspect that they may be sharing their data with political parties, such as the Liberal Party of Canada?
Yes.
Okay, could you elaborate upon that?
I have heard that they have done so.
And you've heard this through
people
sources?
Yes, but I have no documentation.
And when have you heard this?
That I heard that this happened as far back as before the 2015 federal election, and that data was used to select swing ridings, target swing ridings in the 2015 federal election.
And that has, to your knowledge, based upon your sources, continued after the 2015 election?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I know that's when it started, or I've been told that is when it is believed to have started, and I don't know with what regularity or if at all it has continued. That's why I asked the question.
Right, and again, these are from multiple sources that you heard this from.
Well, that the Liberal Party was involved, no, that's only from one source.
Okay, but it's your understanding that substantial data was transferred.
No, I don't know.
No. Okay, you have some information. Okay, so the bottom line is you have some information, but you don't have any further details.
No. But okay. Except to say this, that it would. I think the question here is that why was the federal government so keen to award this contract despite all the red flags? What was the reason? Was there a benefit? And I think a database like that, if in fact it is good quality data, I don't know how good they are at using Salesforce. I do know that I've seen in their financials that they pay about $140,000 a year for the Salesforce license. So I don't know what the quality of their data is, but it's a very enviable data set if it is as good as it could be.
Now, we know, Ms. Krause and Mr. Brown, that we had been in breach of their banking covenants starting in 2018. How difficult was that to find?
Who are you asking, me?
Either Ms. Krause or Mr. Brown, or both.
Not difficult at all. Just read the financial statements. It's the first thing you should read if you're looking at any charity.
Mr. Brown, would you concur? You've reported on it.
Yeah, this information came to our attention via Charity Intelligence, which is an independent charity watchdog. They found that in the last two sets of audited financials from WE. I believe that Charity Intelligence did have some resistance getting one set of financial disclosures from WE Charity, but ultimately they did come into possession of those documents, and it was clear 2 years running that they were in breach of
and this has been in the public domain for some time.
That's correct.
That's correct. So when we put forward their proposal to the government respecting the Canada Student Service Grant, this information would have been readily available, easily accessible, and widely known. Is that fair?
I think that it was accessible certainly through the Charity Intelligence report on We Charity and possibly other places as well.
So how do you square that with representations from officials of government who say they just had no idea about this from a due diligence standpoint?
I don't attempt to.
Okay, fair enough. Now, in terms of the $64,000 that was paid by we directly, through her agency to Margaret Trudeau, was that money paid back to me to we?
According to We Charity, this was a billing error. Our documentation shows that it was, if it was a billing error, it was actually a series of many billing errors, because payments were in the realm of $7,500 speaking fee split into 2 payments. So if you think of $64,000 in payments, that suggests many, many errors. And I'll also point out to this committee, as we've reported, up until, I believe, June 26th, We Charity was telling the public that they had made no payments, neither from their for-profit company or from their charity to the Trudeaus at all. So to their later statement that when they realized these billing errors, they reimbursed the money, it logically follows that they realized these errors when Canada Land showed them that we knew about these errors, at which point I'll give them benefit of the doubt, they reimbursed their charity.
Last question, Michael.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of money going back and forth between we and me to we and me to we to we. And it's we's position that in the end, we has come out on top. Could you just discuss or explain donations compared to contributions and how, in fact, we may not have come out on top in the end?
As Canada Land reported, based on our interview with Kate Bain of Charity Intelligence, when Me to We, the company, moves resources to We Charity, it is a mixture of money, time, products, and because Me to We is a privately held company, we don't really have much insight into what that mixture is. However, when We Charity moves charitable funds raised in our schoolrooms and elsewhere to the Kielburgers' private company, that's cash.
Okay, we will now turn to some confusion during this round. You've been asked why, as a minister, you didn't call for tenders. I know this was a contribution agreement. The implication is that you were the minister responsible. So I got to ask you 2 questions. Who was the minister responsible in terms of this agreement with we? And who was the minister that signed the agreement at the end of the day? Mr. Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was not the minister responsible, as I outlined in my prepared remarks. That was Minister Chagger. And as to your second question on who signed the document, I'm actually not aware of that. My assumption would be it would be Minister Chagger, but I know that Employment and Social Development Canada worked on this program, and that was the arm of the public service that made the recommendation after their work.
Okay, thank you for that. Then next rounds of questioning, we'll start off with Mr. Cooper, Mr. Fragaskatis, Mr. Polyev, and Ms. Zerowitz. Mr. Cooper, 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here. I want to ask you to explain in further detail these $41,000 of hidden expenses. You have characterized these expenses as programming. What do you mean by that?
Well, thank you. When we took a look at our personal records, we found expenses that we'd paid